Sir, I need you to stand up. This seat has been reassigned to another passenger. The words sliced through the quiet first-class cabin with enough confidence that every nearby conversation stopped at once. Coffee cups hovered halfway to waiting hands. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A young mother gently removed her headphones. Even the flight attendant serving drinks froze for a brief moment. Sitting calmly in seat 2 Alpha was Marcus Ellington, a 43-year-old black man wearing a simple charcoal sport coat over a light blue dress shirt, dark slacks, and polished brown shoes. Nothing about his appearance demanded attention. There was no luxury watch flashing beneath the cabin lights, no assistant standing nearby, no security detail waiting outside the aircraft. Resting beside him was a modest leather carry-on that looked no different from hundreds of others boarding the flight that afternoon. Marcus slowly looked up at the lead flight attendant standing beside his seat. Her posture was perfect, her smile carefully controlled, yet her eyes carried complete certainty before she had even glanced at the boarding pass resting in Marcus's hand. "May I ask why?" Marcus replied in a calm, respectful voice. She folded her hands together. "A premium passenger needs this seat, and we need your cooperation." Marcus looked briefly toward the front of the aircraft where a well-dressed white passenger waited in the aisle with an impatient expression, designer luggage positioned beside him as if the outcome had already been decided. The man never looked directly at Marcus. Instead, he looked toward the lead flight attendant as though expecting the inconvenience to disappear within seconds. Marcus raised his boarding pass slightly. "This seat was assigned to me when I checked in." The lead flight attendant barely glanced at the document. "We will help you find another seat." Marcus remained seated. "Has something changed in the reservation system?" A short silence followed before she answered. "We simply need to accommodate another traveler." Around them, quiet whispers began spreading through the cabin. One passenger leaned toward another and quietly muttered, "He should probably just move." An elderly woman seated across the aisle slowly closed the novel resting in her lap, sensing there was more happening than anyone wanted to admit. Marcus looked down at the boarding pass once more before returning his attention to the lead flight attendant. "Before I leave the seat printed on my ticket, could someone verify that my reservation has actually changed?" His tone remained steady, almost conversational. There was no anger. No raised voice. No attempt to embarrass anyone. The lead flight attendant sighed softly. "Sir, delaying boarding helps no one." Marcus nodded politely. "Neither does making a decision before checking the facts." The sentence settled over the cabin with unexpected weight. A younger flight attendant standing several rows away quietly glanced toward the passenger manifest displayed on her company tablet, her expression shifting from routine confidence to growing curiosity. Outside the aircraft windows, baggage crews continued loading luggage beneath the afternoon sunlight while passengers inside the jet bridge waited for boarding to resume, unaware that the real delay had nothing to do with luggage, weather, or mechanical inspections. Marcus had boarded this flight for reasons known only to a handful of people, and none of them were sitting inside this cabin. Months of confidential passenger feedback, internal service reports, and unanswered concerns had quietly reached his office. Instead of reading another summary prepared by someone else, he had chosen to experience the airline exactly as an ordinary traveler would. No executive welcome. No priority escort. No advance notice. Just one boarding pass, one assigned seat, and one opportunity to discover whether fairness truly existed when nobody recognized the man sitting quietly in seat 2 Alpha. As the lead flight attendant waited for Marcus to stand, neither she nor anyone else in the cabin realized they were no longer deciding where one passenger would sit. They were unknowingly taking the first step in a decision that would soon reach far beyond the walls of a single aircraft. Marcus Ellington did not move. He simply remained seated with his boarding pass resting lightly between his fingers, his calm expression revealing neither frustration nor surprise. Years of experience had taught him that composure often revealed more about a situation than confrontation ever could. The lead flight attendant interpreted his silence as resistance rather than confidence. "Sir, we need to complete boarding," she said with professional firmness. Please allow this passenger to take the seat. Marcus looked at her politely. I am happy to cooperate once someone confirms that my reservation has actually changed. The white passenger waiting in the aisle let out a quiet sigh and glanced impatiently at his watch. Without addressing Marcus directly, he said, Can we please keep this moving? The lead flight attendant nodded sympathetically toward him before turning back to Marcus. Sir, another seat will be provided for you. Marcus asked the same question once more. Has my reservation been modified in the system? The answer never came. Instead, another crew member approached after noticing that boarding had stopped. Is there an issue? He asked. Before Marcus could speak, the lead flight attendant answered. We are relocating this passenger. Marcus smiled slightly. Relocating implies that the reservation has already changed. Has it? The second crew member extended his hand. May I see your boarding pass? Marcus immediately handed it over. The barcode was scanned once. The device paused. It refreshed automatically. The crew member frowned slightly before scanning it a second time. The same seat number appeared again. 2 Alpha. He looked toward the lead flight attendant but hesitated before speaking. Marcus quietly noticed the hesitation. It was the first crack in a decision that had been made long before the facts had been checked. Earlier that morning, Marcus had left his downtown hotel before sunrise carrying only a single leather travel bag. His executive assistant believed he was spending the day reviewing financial reports. His board of directors assumed he was attending virtual meetings from another city. Even the airline's executive partnership office had been informed that his visit had been postponed until the following month. Every detail had been carefully arranged because Marcus wanted to experience the airline exactly as every ordinary passenger experienced it. During the previous 6 months, anonymous customer reports had quietly reached his office describing situations that shared one troubling pattern. Travelers repeatedly claimed they were questioned, relocated, or treated differently despite following every rule. Internal investigations repeatedly classified the incidents as isolated misunderstandings. Marcus had built his career on one simple principle. Reliable decisions required first-hand evidence rather than polished summaries. That belief had transformed a small technology company into one of the nation's most respected aviation infrastructure firms. It was also the reason he now sat quietly inside seat 2 Alpha without revealing anything about himself. Around the cabin, passengers continued watching the exchange with growing curiosity. The elderly woman across the aisle studied Marcus with thoughtful eyes while the businessman near the window slowly lowered his laptop. Several people seemed uncomfortable, yet no one interrupted. Near the galley, a younger flight attendant opened the digital passenger manifest on her company tablet and entered the confirmation number manually instead of relying on the automatic boarding list. Her eyes widened almost immediately before she checked the information again. Every detail matched perfectly. Passenger name. Flight number. Boarding group. Seat 2 Alpha. She looked toward Marcus, then toward the lead flight attendant, realizing that the system already contained the answer everyone had been searching for. The only question remaining was whether anyone was willing to accept it before making a decision they could never take back. The younger flight attendant took a careful step forward, holding her company tablet close to her chest. I have verified the reservation manually, she said, choosing every word with deliberate care. Mr. Marcus Ellington is confirmed in seat 2 Alpha. For a brief moment, complete silence settled over the front of the aircraft. Several passengers looked from the tablet to Marcus, expecting the conversation to end immediately. Instead, the lead flight attendant frowned slightly. Check it again, she replied. The younger attendant did exactly that. She entered the confirmation number a second time, refreshed the passenger manifest, and reviewed every line individually. The reservation is still confirmed, she answered. There are no duplicate assignments, no upgrade conflicts, and no seating changes. Marcus remained seated, his expression unchanged. Thank you for verifying the facts, he said politely. The white passenger waiting in the aisle shifted his expensive carry-on and spoke for the first time. "There has to be another premium seat somewhere else." His voice carried confidence rather than hostility, as though he believed the airline would naturally solve the problem in his favor. The lead flight attendant nodded toward him before turning back to Marcus. "Sir, even if your reservation appears correct, we still need to resolve this situation." Marcus looked at her calmly. "Resolving a situation begins with accepting what has already been confirmed." The second crew member quietly checked his handheld scanner once again. The result had not changed. Seat 2 Alpha remained assigned to Marcus Ellington. Before he could say anything, the gate agent stepped onto the aircraft after receiving a request from the cabin crew. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked. The lead flight attendant answered immediately. "We may have a seating discrepancy." The gate agent accepted Marcus's boarding pass and compared it with the information displayed on her own device. Her eyes moved slowly across the screen before she looked back at Marcus. "Everything matches our records," she admitted. "The reservation is valid." The elderly woman seated across the aisle gently closed her novel. "Then why is this gentleman still standing in the middle of a discussion?" she asked quietly. No one answered her. A retired airline captain seated near the bulkhead folded his newspaper and joined the conversation with calm authority. "Good crews verify facts before changing passenger assignments," he said. "That protects everyone involved." Several nearby passengers nodded almost instinctively. The atmosphere inside the cabin began changing. Earlier, most people had simply assumed the crew must be correct. Now uncertainty was spreading from one row to the next. The younger flight attendant glanced once more at the digital manifest before looking toward the lead flight attendant. "I believe Mr. Ellington should remain in his assigned seat." Instead of ending the matter, the statement only deepened the tension. The lead flight attendant folded her arms. "I would prefer station supervision review this personally." The gate agent looked surprised. "We already have confirmation from 2 systems." "Then one more review will remove all doubt," the lead flight attendant insisted. Marcus listened quietly without interrupting. He had spent decades attending executive meetings where perfectly intelligent people continued searching for new explanations because they were unwilling to accept the first one that challenged their assumptions. Looking around the cabin, he recognized the same pattern unfolding again. Some people changed their opinions the moment reliable evidence appeared. Others searched for another reason to preserve their original judgment. Outside the aircraft, the jet bridge remained crowded with waiting passengers while baggage crews continued working beneath the afternoon sun. Inside the first-class cabin, however, something much larger than a seating disagreement was quietly taking shape. Every additional minute revealed that the real conflict had never been about one seat. It was about whether facts would ultimately matter more than first impressions. The station supervisor arrived only moments later, carrying a tablet connected directly to the airline reservation network. Unlike everyone before him, he said very little. He accepted Marcus Ellington's boarding pass, entered the confirmation number by hand, compared it with the live passenger manifest, and waited for the system to finish synchronizing. The loading icon disappeared. The result was unmistakable. Seat 2 Alpha belonged to Marcus Ellington. There were no duplicate bookings, no operational upgrades, no emergency seat changes, and no hidden notes requesting reassignment. The supervisor looked at the screen for several more seconds as if expecting it to change on its own. It never did. "The reservation is confirmed," he finally said. "Mr. Ellington is occupying the correct seat." The younger flight attendant quietly lowered her tablet, relieved that someone with greater authority had reached the same conclusion she had already found. Several passengers exchanged brief glances, assuming the matter was finally over. The retired airline captain gave a small nod of approval while the elderly woman across the aisle returned her novel to her lap without opening it, still watching the conversation unfold. Marcus remained exactly where he had been from the beginning, sitting comfortably with both hands resting lightly on the armrests. He had not raised his voice once. He had not interrupted anyone. He had simply asked that the facts be verified before a decision was made. The white passenger standing in the aisle looked toward the supervisor with visible disappointment. "There has to be another solution," he said. "I paid for a premium experience." The supervisor answered professionally. "Every customer deserves the service they purchased, but this seat is already assigned." For the first time, uncertainty appeared across the lead flight attendant's face. She glanced from the supervisor to the waiting passenger and then back to Marcus, as though weighing two completely different realities. One was supported by every system the airline operated. The other had been built entirely on her original assumption. Rather than accepting the confirmed reservation, she took a slow breath and spoke carefully. "If Mr. Ellington is technically assigned this seat, perhaps we should ask whether he would voluntarily exchange it." The words immediately changed the atmosphere inside the cabin. Marcus looked directly at her with the same calm expression he had maintained since boarding. "May I ask why I should volunteer to give up a seat that belongs to me?" No one answered immediately. The supervisor lowered his tablet. The younger flight attendant looked down at the floor. The retired captain quietly folded his hands together. Even the businessman who had first suggested Marcus should simply move now avoided making eye contact. The silence itself became an answer. Marcus continued speaking in the same measured tone. "If another passenger requires accommodation because of a documented operational issue, I would gladly consider helping. But every system has now confirmed that there is no operational issue. The only thing left is a decision based on preference." His words carried no accusation, yet they settled heavily across the first-class cabin. The supervisor slowly nodded, recognizing the distinction. Policies existed to solve genuine operational problems, not to replace verified reservations with personal judgment. Outside the aircraft, the boarding clock continued counting down while airport operations waited for confirmation that the cabin was ready for departure. Inside, however, the delay had taken on a different meaning. Every additional minute exposed how difficult it could become for intelligent professionals to reverse a decision once it had been made for the wrong reason. Marcus understood that lesson better than anyone in the cabin. Throughout his career, he had watched organizations spend millions of dollars correcting mistakes that could have been avoided by asking one simple question at the beginning. What do the facts actually say? As the lead flight attendant stood silently beside seat 2 Alpha, the answer had already been displayed on 3 different screens. The only remaining obstacle was whether those responsible were willing to accept it before the consequences extended far beyond the cabin door. The station supervisor looked toward the boarding door, then back at the lead flight attendant, clearly expecting the discussion to end. Instead, she straightened her uniform and spoke with quiet determination. "Mr. Ellington, if you are unwilling to exchange seats voluntarily, I will have to ask you to step into the jet bridge while we resolve this matter." A wave of disbelief moved through the first-class cabin. The younger flight attendant looked up immediately. "But his reservation has already been verified," she said softly. The supervisor remained silent, his expression growing increasingly uneasy. Marcus slowly stood, not because he accepted the request, but because he wanted every person watching to understand exactly what was happening. He picked up his leather carry-on and calmly asked, "Am I being asked to leave my assigned seat even after every official system has confirmed that it belongs to me?" No one answered directly. The lead flight attendant simply repeated, "Please come with me." Marcus nodded once. "Very well." He stepped into the aisle without a trace of anger. As he walked toward the aircraft door, the elderly woman across the aisle quietly said, "This does not seem right." The retired captain added, "The reservation has already been confirmed. I hope someone is documenting this." Those words lingered in the air as Marcus crossed into the jet bridge. The sounds of the airport immediately replaced the quiet cabin. Rolling suitcases echoed across the floor. Ground crews spoke over distant radios. Aircraft engines hummed far beyond the terminal windows. Marcus paused for only a moment, staring through the glass toward the runway stretching across the afternoon sunlight. The scene awakened a memory he had carried for more than 30 years. He was 11 years old, standing beside his father inside another airport, watching airline employees repeatedly question a ticket that had already been confirmed. His father had been dressed in a neatly pressed business suit after weeks of saving for a first-class seat on the most important trip of his career. Yet before anyone checked the reservation, assumptions had been made. Questions had been asked that other passengers never heard. Doubts had been raised that had nothing to do with the printed ticket in his father's hand. Marcus still remembered looking up at him, expecting frustration or anger. Instead, his father had smiled gently and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son," he had said, "never let someone else's opinion decide your character. But never ignore a system that refuses to learn from its mistakes." Those words had followed Marcus through college, through the early years of building his company, through every board meeting where difficult decisions demanded patience instead of emotion. He had spent his career investing in technology designed to eliminate human error because he believed systems should protect fairness instead of depending upon assumptions. Standing inside the jet bridge decades later, he realized this moment was no longer about his own seat. It had become another example of the very pattern countless travelers had quietly described in reports that too often disappeared into internal files labeled "resolved." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. He looked at the screen for several seconds before unlocking it. There were dozens of unread messages from executives, financial analysts, and board members expecting routine updates throughout the day. None of them knew where he actually was. None of them knew why he had chosen to travel alone. Marcus selected a single contact that almost no one outside his executive office recognized. He rested his thumb above the call button without pressing it immediately. He had hoped this trip would end with proof that the airline's customer experience had improved. Instead, every verified fact had been ignored until the issue grew larger than it ever needed to become. He quietly looked back through the open aircraft door, where passengers were still waiting, and finally made his decision. Marcus pressed the call button only once. The line connected before the second ring. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ellington," a composed voice answered immediately. "This is Evelyn Carter from Executive Partnership Operations." Marcus spoke quietly, careful that no one standing nearby could mistake his tone for anger. "Evelyn, I need you to begin Executive Review Protocol 7. There was a brief pause, not from confusion, but from recognition. "Protocol 7 requires first-hand operational confirmation," she replied. "Can you verify that you are personally witnessing the incident?" Marcus looked through the aircraft door toward the first-class cabin where passengers remained seated, waiting for answers that should have come much earlier. "I can verify that every reservation system confirmed my assigned seat. I can also verify that I was still asked to surrender it and then leave the aircraft after those confirmations were completed." Evelyn's voice became even more measured. "Understood. I am documenting your direct observation. Please remain available." Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket. He did not contact an attorney. He did not call the media. He did not demand that anyone lose a job. He simply activated the same review process his company required whenever evidence suggested that policies had failed in practice rather than on paper. Thousands of miles away, inside the Executive Operations Center of Brooks Integrated Systems, a secure notification appeared simultaneously on several encrypted monitors. Executive Review Protocol 7. Source verification complete. Live operational incident. Immediate assessment required. Analysts who had been reviewing infrastructure reports stopped typing almost instantly. A compliance director opened the incoming file while another executive confirmed Marcus's secure identification credentials. Within moments, a conference bridge connected legal advisors, financial oversight officers, customer experience auditors, and partnership executives responsible for major aviation investments. No one on the call sounded alarmed. They sounded disciplined. Every participant understood that Protocol 7 existed for one reason. When the chief executive personally witnessed a breakdown involving fairness, compliance, or contractual standards, assumptions were prohibited. Only verified facts would guide every decision. Inside the conference room, Evelyn summarized the information already confirmed. Verified reservation. Multiple internal system confirmations. Passenger removed from assigned seating area despite documented validation. Incident remains active. The chief compliance officer looked across the table. Has the airline executive liaison been notified? Evelyn answered, not yet. Standard procedure requires evidence preservation before external notification. The chief financial officer reviewed the partnership agreements displayed on the large screen. One section immediately captured everyone's attention. The airline's ongoing modernization initiative depended upon scheduled funding approvals tied directly to operational performance benchmarks, including documented customer treatment standards. Any active executive compliance review automatically paused discretionary financial authorization until the investigation established whether contractual obligations had been satisfied. The chief financial officer quietly closed the document and said, "Prepare a temporary administrative hold." No one argued. No one celebrated. It was simply the next required step under an agreement negotiated years earlier to ensure accountability accompanied every dollar invested. Back at the airport, Marcus remained standing near the terminal windows while airport employees continued moving around him without recognizing who he was. The lead flight attendant occasionally glanced toward the jet bridge, apparently expecting him to become impatient or demand immediate action. Instead, Marcus patiently watched aircraft taxi across the runway beneath the bright afternoon sky. Less than 5 minutes after his call, a secure notification reached the airline's executive finance division. The message was brief, formal, and impossible to misunderstand. Effective immediately, all pending approvals connected to the $120 million modernization partnership had entered temporary executive review status pending compliance verification. The funding had not been cancelled. It had not been withdrawn. It had simply stopped moving until the facts could no longer be ignored. Inside the airline headquarters, the notification reached the executive finance division less than 60 seconds after the administrative hold became active. At first, the message appeared no different from dozens of routine compliance alerts received each week. Then one line immediately changed the atmosphere across the conference room. Executive Review Protocol 7. Partnership Funding Status. Temporary Administrative Hold. Amount subject to review, $120 million. The Vice President of Finance looked at the screen twice before reaching for the secure telephone. Who initiated this review? He asked. An analyst answered without looking away from her monitor. The authorization originated directly from Brooks Integrated Systems under executive credentials. The room became noticeably quieter. Another executive opened the partnership dashboard and watched as several scheduled funding approvals instantly changed from pending release to under executive compliance review. No money had disappeared, but every planned authorization connected to the modernization initiative had automatically stopped moving through the approval process. Across another floor, the airline chief executive officer was interrupted during a strategic planning meeting by his executive assistant, who entered carrying a tablet with unusual urgency. "Sir, finance has requested your immediate attention." The chief executive officer scanned the notification and immediately stood. "What triggered this?" he asked. "We are still confirming the details," the assistant replied. "The review references an active customer service incident on one of today's departures." The chief executive officer frowned. "A customer service incident activated a partnership review?" "Yes, sir." "That appears to be exactly what happened." Within minutes, senior leaders from operations, legal, customer experience, finance, and corporate partnerships joined an emergency conference call. The chief legal officer spoke first. "Does anyone know which passenger is involved?" Silence followed until a partnership manager quietly answered, "The review file has not released the passenger identity yet. Only executive investigators can access that portion until evidence preservation is complete." Back at the airport, none of those developments were visible to the passengers waiting inside the aircraft. They only noticed that boarding had completely stopped. The captain received a message through the cockpit communication system requesting that departure preparations remain on hold pending operational review. He read the message twice before calling the gate supervisor. "Is there a mechanical issue?" he asked. "Negative," came the reply. "Weather?" "Negative." "Security?" "Negative." There was a short pause before the supervisor answered carefully. "This is an executive compliance matter." The captain had spent nearly 3 decades flying commercial aircraft and knew that those words were rarely used unless something significant had reached the highest levels of corporate leadership. Inside the first-class cabin, passengers began exchanging quiet conversations. The businessman who had originally suggested Marcus should simply move now looked noticeably uncomfortable. The elderly woman calmly observed the crew members speaking into company radios with increasingly serious expressions. The retired airline captain quietly whispered, "Something larger is happening now." The younger flight attendant glanced through the open aircraft door and saw Marcus still standing peacefully near the terminal windows, carrying his leather bag exactly as before. He had not argued. He had not demanded special treatment. He had not revealed who he was. Yet somehow the entire tone of the operation had shifted around him. Near the boarding door, the station supervisor's company phone rang. He answered, listened for less than 30 seconds, and his expression immediately changed. "Understood," he replied. "We will preserve the current passenger status until further instruction." As he ended the call, he slowly looked toward the lead flight attendant, who suddenly realized that the situation was no longer under local control. Decisions that had begun with one verified seat assignment were now being reviewed far above everyone present, and for the first time that afternoon, those who had been certain they were making the right decision began wondering whether they had underestimated the quiet man they had asked to leave. The chief executive officer did not wait for another briefing. He instructed the executive partnership director to establish an immediate secure connection with the airport station manager, the captain, and the executive review team. Within minutes, a conference call linked the airline headquarters to the departure gate. The station supervisor answered first, carefully summarizing everything that had happened from the moment Marcus Ellington boarded the aircraft until he was asked to wait inside the jet bridge. Every statement was supported by digital records, boarding scans, reservation logs, and crew communications. There were no missing details left to explain. When the summary ended, the executive partnership director spoke with unusual precision. "Before we continue, I need to confirm one fact. Has the passenger identified as Marcus Ellington revealed his corporate position to anyone on site?" The station supervisor answered immediately. "No. He has identified himself only by the name printed on his boarding pass." A brief silence followed before the airline chief executive officer asked the question everyone had been wondering. "Then why has Executive Review Protocol 7 been activated?" The response came from Evelyn Carter, speaking on behalf of Brooks Integrated Systems. "Because Mr. Marcus Ellington personally activated it after verifying that established procedures were ignored despite repeated confirmation of the facts." Another silence settled across the conference line, this one noticeably longer than the first. The chief executive officer slowly asked, "Please clarify Mr. Ellington's authority regarding this partnership." Evelyn answered without hesitation. "Marcus Ellington is the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Integrated Systems. Under the strategic investment agreement signed between our organizations, he retains final executive approval over discretionary funding connected to the $120 million modernization initiative. Executive Review Protocol 7 temporarily pauses further financial authorization whenever the chief executive officer personally documents evidence suggesting contractual service standards may not have been upheld." No one interrupted her explanation. The airline chief financial officer quietly closed the report in front of him as the significance of those words settled over the room. The administrative hold had not been triggered by an outside regulator, a government agency, or a legal dispute. It had been initiated by the individual whose signature ultimately determined whether the next phase of investment could proceed. At the departure gate, the station supervisor slowly lowered his phone and looked toward the lead flight attendant. She stared back at him, her expression shifting from confidence to disbelief. The younger flight attendant covered her mouth with one hand, remembering how many times the reservation had already been confirmed. The retired airline captain seated inside the cabin noticed the sudden change in every crew member's posture before anyone said a single word. Outside the aircraft, Marcus remained exactly where he had been standing, watching another airplane lift gracefully into the afternoon sky. A customer service manager approached him with measured steps. "Mr. Ellington," she said respectfully, "our executive leadership would like to speak with you at your convenience." Marcus turned toward her with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the afternoon. "I will be happy to speak with them," he replied. "But first, I would appreciate knowing whether the facts have finally been accepted." The manager lowered her eyes briefly before answering. "Yes, sir. They have." Marcus gave a small nod, not with satisfaction, but with quiet relief. From the very beginning, he had never wanted recognition, special treatment, or an apology based on his title. He had wanted only one simple principle to prevail. Decisions should follow verified facts instead of assumptions. At last, after every unnecessary delay, the people responsible were finally beginning to understand that lesson. The customer service manager personally escorted Marcus Ellington back through the aircraft door. Conversation stopped the moment passengers saw him return. The same aisle that had felt tense only minutes earlier now remained completely silent as Marcus walked toward seat 2 Alpha carrying his leather bag with the same calm dignity he had shown from the beginning. The lead flight attendant stepped forward before he reached his seat. Her carefully rehearsed professionalism had given way to genuine reflection. "Mr. Ellington," she said quietly, "I owe you a sincere apology. I made assumptions before allowing the facts to guide my decision. I understand now that my actions affected far more than your journey today." Marcus looked at her for a brief moment before answering. "Thank you for saying that." She continued, "Our executive leadership has instructed us to restore your original seating assignment immediately, and they have begun a full review of everything that occurred." Marcus nodded politely. "That review should not exist because of who I am. It should exist because the same thing could happen to someone whose name no one would ever recognize." Those words lingered throughout the first-class cabin. The retired airline captain slowly smiled with quiet respect. The elderly woman closed her novel once more and softly said, "That is exactly right." Even the businessman who had earlier suggested that Marcus should simply move lowered his eyes before speaking. "Sir, I judged the situation before I understood it. I am sorry." Marcus offered a small, gracious smile. "The important thing is what we choose to do after we learn the truth." He placed his carry-on into the overhead compartment and returned to seat 2 Alpha without ceremony. There was no celebration, no applause requested, and no desire to embarrass anyone. Moments later, the captain's voice came across the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We appreciate your understanding as we completed an operational review. We are now ready for departure." Outside the aircraft, ground crews removed the final equipment from the gate while the jet bridge slowly pulled away. At airline headquarters, the chief executive officer concluded the emergency conference by ordering a comprehensive review of customer service procedures, mandatory bias awareness training, and a complete evaluation of how verified passenger information should override personal assumptions in every future decision. The temporary administrative hold on the $120 million modernization partnership remained in place pending the completion of those corrective actions, not as punishment, but as confirmation that accountability and improvement would move forward together. Marcus later approved the continuation of the partnership after receiving documented evidence that meaningful changes had begun. He believed that real leadership was measured not by the ability to expose mistakes but by the willingness to create better systems afterward. As the aircraft climbed above the clouds, sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating the quiet cabin with a warm afternoon glow. Marcus looked out across the endless horizon and thought once more about his father's words from decades earlier. Never allow someone else's opinion to define your character, but never ignore a system that refuses to learn. Today that promise had come full circle. A single verified seat assignment had revealed a much larger truth. Respect that appears only after titles, wealth, or authority are revealed is not genuine respect at all. Genuine respect begins the moment we choose to see another person as equally worthy before we know anything about their position, influence, or success. That lesson was worth far more than any first-class seat, and it was the only outcome Marcus had hoped this journey would ultimately deliver.